I was walking past the Palace of Westminster the other day, down by the river, and I was looking at all that scaffolding. It feels like that building's been covered in tarps and metal poles for my entire adult life.
Hmm.
And it struck me that it's just the perfect metaphor for the House of Lords itself.
How so? Just incredibly expensive, taking forever to fix, and obscuring the view.
Well, yeah, there is definitely that. But more that it's this ancient, crumbling structure that everyone agrees is structurally unsound. We all know the plumbing is bad, the wiring is from the 1940s,
Right.
but we're terrified to really touch the foundations in case the whole roof comes down.
That is a very evocative image, and it's accurate. Usually when people think of the House of Lords, they have this visceral reaction. It's either a punchline, people in ermine robes napping on red benches, or it's this baffling constitutional relic that we just accept because, well, it's always been there.
Exactly. It feels like the dusty attic of British politics. There's probably some important stuff up there, but you're a bit afraid to open the door because of all the cobwebs. But today, we're doing something different. We're not doing the usual abolish it or keep it debate. We were looking at a fascinating stack of research titled Architecture of Reform, Rethinking the House of Lords.
Yep.
And honestly, reading through it, it's not the shouting match I expected.
No, it really isn't. And that's why this particular deep dive is going to be so refreshing for you listening. The source material, it explicitly states, it's not here to declare a winner.
Right.
It's not trying to sell us on a slogan like abolish the lords or elect everyone tomorrow.
Which is a huge relief because those conversations usually hit a wall within about 30 seconds.
They do.
You get the democracy camp yelling at the tradition camp, and nobody listens. It's like watching two people argue about what color to paint a wall when the wall is currently on fire.
Precisely. The mission of this text is much cooler, almost clinical. It asks us to stop introducing new ideas for a moment, to stop trying to add new wings to the building and instead just look at the whole picture.
The goal is to unbundle a complex problem.
Exactly.
Unbundle. I latched onto that word immediately when I was reading. It sounds like we're finally untangling that giant knot of cables behind the TV that nobody wants to deal with.
That is actually a perfect analogy. The core argument here is that if we slow down and if we separate the functions of the House of Lords, we realize we haven't been dealing with one big problem. We've been dealing with three very different problems that we've accidentally mashed together.
Into this one institution.
So
the promise here is that by the end of this deep dive, we aren't just going to understand the House of Lords better, but we might actually learn a better way to look at any messy, complex system.
That's the idea. It's all about separating function from form. When you stop looking at the robes and you start looking at the mechanics, the load-bearing walls, to keep your metaphor going, the solutions become surprisingly clear.
Okay, I'm sold. I'm ready to pop the hood.
Yeah.
The source talks about looking at the Lords as it actually operates. What does that mean in this context? Because on the surface, it operates by people making speeches and, voting.
It means moving past the symbolism to the actual stress tests. The text argues that the House of Lords is a working part of the system. It carries a structural load.
Okay.
And when the authors analyzed what that load actually consists of, they identified three distinct pressures. And this is the bundle we were just talking about.
All right, let's unpack these pressures one by one. If we're unbundling this knot, what's the first wire we're pulling out?
So the first pressure is ethics.
Ethics. Wow, that's a heavy word for a legislative chamber.
Yeah.
I feel like we usually associate ethics with priests or philosophers, not politicians.
It is heavy. But the text points out that issues of moral judgment, long-term harms, and these really value-laden decisions, they keep surfacing in the House of Lords specifically.
Why there, though? Why doesn't that happen in the House of Commons? I mean, they're the elected representatives. Shouldn't they be the moral voice of the people?
You'd think so. But you have to consider the incentives. The analysis suggests there isn't really a clearer place for them to go. The Commons is just, it's driven by the election cycle.
It's fast-paced.
Super fast-paced, highly partisan, and reactive.
Right. If you're an MP, you're worried about the polling numbers for next week or the scandal in the tabloids today.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have the luxury of sitting back and pondering the deep moral implications of a bill for 3 weeks.
You've got constituents emailing you about potholes.
Exactly.
That's it. It's about bandwidth and timeline. So think about questions like bioethics or human rights or the long-term societal impact of artificial intelligence.
Things where the consequences might not be felt for 20 years.
Precisely. And an MP is thinking about an election that's, what, 2 years away?
If they're lucky, yeah.
Correct. So these heavy long-term questions, they tend to drift upwards to the Lords. It's become the de facto conscience of the legislature.
Not because it was designed that way, though.
No, not at all. Remember, it started as a house for aristocrats, but because the system needed a release valve for that ethical pressure, and the Lords was kind of the quietest room in the building.
That makes so much sense.
Yes.
It's the junk drawer theory of government. If you don't have a specific place for something complex, it just ends up in the drawer with the batteries and the rubber bands.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so ethics is pressure number 1. What's the second pressure in this bundle?
Pressure number 2 is expertise and institutional memory.
Ah, this is the one we hear about the most. The argument that we need the Lords because that's where the experts are. You know, the scientists, the generals, the captains of industry.
Yes, but the source frames it as more of a structural necessity rather than just a nice to have. It highlights this conflict between long-running systems and these really short electoral cycles.
Right.
Think about national infrastructure, healthcare systems, defense procurement. These things operate on 10, 20, even 30-year timelines.
And governments operate on 4 or 5-year timelines.
Exactly. And the ministers themselves change even faster.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like I see a new education minister or transport secretary every 6 months. It's a revolving door. By the time they learn where the bathroom is, they've been reshuffled.
Right. So where does the knowledge go? I mean, where's the person who remembers why a decision was made 15 years ago?
If everyone in the room is new, yeah.
Who stops you from making the same mistake you made in 2010? The text notes that people who understand how things work over decades, they accumulate. They build up in the one place that doesn't just reset every general election.
The Lords, again. It's acting like an external hard drive for the nation's brain.
That is a great way to visualize it. We have bundled institutional memory into the Lords because, again, the Commons essentially reformats its hard drive every election cycle. You need someone who remembers the file paths.
Okay, so we've got the ethical conscience, the part that worries about right and wrong. We've got the memory hard drive, the part that knows how things actually work. What's the third pressure in the bundle?
So the third is the fundamental function of an upper chamber itself, legislative review. This is the democratic theory part. How much independence do we want a reviewing chamber to have? How much legitimacy does it need to challenge the government?
This is the classic check and balance. The Senate stopping the president, that kind of thing. Just asking the government, are you sure you want to do this?
Correct. But here's the aha moment the source provides. We treat these three things, ethics, expertise, and legislative review, as if they're all the same problem.
But they're not. They're totally different skill sets.
Yeah. Completely different. I mean, needing an expert on nuclear physics to review a power plant bill is functionally different from needing a moral philosopher to debate assisted dying.
And both of those are different from needing a Democratic chamber to just say, wait a minute, to a rushed piece of tax legislation.
Exactly. And because we've mashed them all into one room, every time we try to fix one of them, we end up breaking the others.
Can you give me an example of that? How does fixing one break the others?
Well, think about the most common call for reform. Make it elected.
Right.
If you say, the Lords isn't democratic enough, let's elect everyone, you solve the legitimacy problem. You solve the legislative review problem because now they have a mandate from the people.
But what happens to the expertise?
It's gone.
You lose it. Because the Nobel Prize-winning scientist or the retired general isn't going to go out and campaign in a constituency, print leaflets, kiss babies to get elected. They just want to share their knowledge.
Exactly. You lose the hard drive. And then if you go the other way and you say, we need more experts, let's appoint more professors and doctors, you might solve the expertise problem.
But you make the legitimacy problem worse.
So much worse. Because now you have even more unelected people making laws for the rest of us.
You have hit the nail on the head. That is the trap. That's why reform always fails. We're trying to solve a 3-variable equation with only one variable.
Yeah.
It's like trying to optimize a car for speed, fuel efficiency, and towing capacity all at once. You end up with something that does none of them well.
And that is where the unbundling comes in. The source says, and I love this line, as soon as those strands are separated, the conversation changes.
Okay, this is the part of the deep dive where we get to play SimCity. Let's assume we can redesign this. The text invites us to unbundle these problems. Let's start with ethics. If we take it out of the Lord's bundle, where? Where does it go?
The text argues that ethics doesn't have to live in the Lords by default. I mean, currently, it's handled unevenly, sometimes awkwardly, but occasionally with real force. The alternative is to create a clearer, more deliberate space for it.
What would that look like? Are we talking about a council of philosophers sitting on a mountain somewhere?
Not quite that abstract, perhaps, but imagine a body specifically tasked with ethical review. One that feeds into Parliament but doesn't try to overrule it. It removes the burden from the lords to be the sole moral arbiter.
So you could have a group of people whose only job is to say, hey, have you thought about the ethical implications of this genetic editing bill? Without them necessarily having to vote on the road tax.
Exactly. You solve the ethics pressure without complicating the legislative review pressure. It makes the ethical input explicit rather than implicit.
Okay.
It's about ensuring that the question, is this right, gets asked by someone whose job it is to ask it.
Okay, let's look at expertise. This is the one I find really interesting because the text mentions something called an ALB bench. I had to double check what that meant. Can you break that down?
So ALB stands for arm's length body. These are the independent agencies and regulators, things like the Environment Agency, the Competition and Markets Authority.
The watchdogs, the people who actually measure the water quality or check the banks.
The watchdogs, yes, but also the data holders. The text suggests we could represent expertise deliberately. Instead of hoping a scientist gets appointed to the Lords by a prime minister, you could have an expert bench or an ALB bench.
Like a reserved section in the chamber.
In a way, but with a different job description. The proposal is for experts to have long terms, and this is key, soft powers that focus on explanation rather than control.
I love that distinction. Explanation rather than control. Unpack that for me. That sounds like a consultant's phrase.
It's crucial. Right now, if you appoint an expert to the Lords, they get a vote. They can say no to a law.
Right, a political act.
A political act. But the source argues that maybe what we really need from experts isn't their vote, it's their voice. We need them to stand up and say, here is the data, here is the history, here is what will happen to the water table if you pass this bill.
That's a massive difference. It separates the knowing how things work from the deciding what to do.
Yes. Currently, we confuse the two. We think because someone's an expert, they should have a vote on the legislation. But if you move the experts to this specific bench where they have the power to explain and warn, but not to block...
You ensure the expertise is always there, but you don't mess up the democratic balance.
Precisely.
That is such a subtle but powerful shift. It sounds almost technocratic, but in a way that respects democracy because they aren't the ones pressing the final button.
Exactly.
It's like the GPS in your car. It tells you traffic ahead, but it doesn't grab the steering wheel.
That is a brilliant analogy. The expert bench is the GPS. It provides the data, the warning, the route options. But the elected representatives are still driving the car.
Okay, so we've moved ethics to a deliberate space, maybe a specific committee or council. We've moved expertise to a specific bench with soft power, our GPS. What's left of the actual House of Lords?
That is the big payoff. The text says once you strip away the requirement for the Lords to be the sole home of ethics and expertise, the form of the House itself becomes flexible.
It frees it up to just be a reviewing chamber.
Completely.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the arguments against an elected chamber get weaker. If the experts are protected elsewhere and the ethical review is happening elsewhere, maybe you can have an elected upper house to handle that legislative review and legitimacy part.
Or a mixed one.
Or a mixed one. The text says each option solves one problem and creates another, but the crucial point is
that the decisions don't lock each other in.
Exactly. You can solve the democratic deficit without losing the expertise. You can solve the ethical consistency problem without breaking the legislative review function.
That feels like solving a Rubik's Cube by peeling the stickers off and putting them back on the right way. It feels like cheating, but when you look at the result, it's just better design.
It's not cheating, it's architecture. And that leads us to the core philosophy of this whole report.
Let's get into that. Section 3 of our deep dive, design versus tradition. Because the source material is pretty careful about what it isn't saying. It's not promising some utopia where everyone holds hands and agrees on everything, is it?
No, and that's so important. The authors explicitly state they aren't pretending there is a neutral, purely technical answer. They warn us against assuming that better institutional design automatically equals better politics.
Politics is always going to be messy. People will always disagree on tax, on war, on welfare. No amount of unbundling is going to fix human disagreement.
And that's a good thing. The goal isn't to eliminate disagreement. The goal, according to the text, is to make the trade-off visible.
What does that mean?
Ye-
Making the trade-offs visible.
Well, right now, when we argue about the Lords, we talk past each other. I say it's undemocratic, and you say, but we need experts. We're arguing apples and oranges. We aren't even on the same battlefield.
Right. I'm arguing legitimacy, who has the right to decide. You're arguing capability, who knows the most. We're just yelling into the void.
But if we unbundle the system, the disagreement becomes productive. We can argue about priorities. Do we value speed versus caution? Do we value clarity versus flexibility?
So instead of fighting over the existence of the building, we're fighting over the settings on the dashboard. I think we need 20% more caution in this bill versus, no, we need speed.
Exactly. It raises the quality of the argument, and this leads to the deepest question in the source material, which I think is fascinating for anyone interested in how systems work. It's this tension between the implicit and the deliberate.
This stood out to me too. The idea that the British system, and honestly, a lot of old systems, relies on things implicitly.
Our current system relies on the hope that ethics and long-term thinking will just happen. We hope the Prime Minister appoints good people. We hope the Lords behave themselves. We hope the traditions hold.
We hope the good chap's theory of government works.
Pretty much. It's the fingers crossed method of government. It worked for my grandfather. Hopefully it works for me.
It is.
And the text asks a hard question. Are we willing to keep handling these things implicitly? Or do we want to start designing for them deliberately? Do we want to build a system where ethics isn't an accident, but a feature? Where expertise isn't a happy coincidence, but a guarantee?
It's removing the excuse, isn't it? The text has this great line about removing the excuse that the problem is too tangled, too historical, or too strange to think about clearly.
That's the ultimate takeaway. We often use tradition as a shield to avoid doing the hard work of design. We say, oh, it's 1,000 years old, it's too complicated to touch. This deep dive says, no, it is not too complicated.
It's just three things bundled together.
Just three things. Separate them, and the choices become clear.
It's empowering, actually. It takes this monolith, this confused mess of ermine and stone, and breaks it down into Lego bricks. And once you have the bricks, you can build whatever you want.
And that applies to more than just the House of Lords.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
So let's wrap this up and zoom out for the listener. We started with a confused institution, the guys in the robes. We realized it's actually a bundle of three pressures: ethics, expertise, and legislative review.
We saw that by unbundling them, we create choices. We can design a space for ethics. We can design a space for expertise using things like that ALB bench. And that frees us up to decide what we want the chamber itself to be.
Democratic, appointed, or mixed. And finally, we realize this is a choice between relying on luck, that implicit tradition, or relying on design deliberate structures.
It really is a lesson in problem solving. When you feel stuck, when a system feels broken and you can't agree on how to fix it, ask yourself, are we arguing about the wrong things because we haven't separated the questions?
That is the takeaway for you listening right now. Whether you're looking at your company's org chart, a project that's solved, or even a family argument, are you dealing with a bundle? Are you trying to solve for efficiency and creativity and morale all with one reading? Maybe you need to unbundle them.
Indeed. But I want to leave the listener with one final thought, something the text hints at but leaves open-ended. It's a bit of a sting in the tail.
Go for it. I love a good sting in the tail.
We've talked about moving from implicit to deliberate. That sounds great. We want to design distinct spaces for ethics and expertise, but here's the catch. If we design them deliberately, we have to define them.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Right now, expertise in the Lords is a bit fuzzy. It's flexible. A prime minister can appoint a poet, a scientist, a banker, a nurse. It's organic. But if you create an expert bench, someone has to write the rule that says who counts as an expert. Someone has to write the definition of ethics.
And whoever writes the definitions holds the power. If you define expert narrowly, you might exclude the poet or the community leader because they don't have a PhD.
Exactly. Was the tangle actually what kept those definitions flexible? If we tidy it all up, do we lose something important in the process? Do we create a rigid technocracy where only approved experts get a voice?
That is a thought to chew on. Is the messiness a bug, or is it actually a feature that keeps the system human? We'll leave you with that to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of reform.
It has been a pleasure.
See you next time.